Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Kostas Glinos, and I will be the moderator for this session on open science at the 2030 horizon. We have a distinguished panel with us to discuss this fascinating topic, and we'll say in a moment why it's so fascinating. First, we have Rebecca Lawrence, who is Managing Director of F1000, one of the innovative open access publishers. Rebecca was member of the Open Science Policy Platform and has led the development of a number of funder or institution-based publishing platforms that aim to chart, as she says, a new trajectory in the way research results are communicated. We have then Professor Eva Mendes from the University Carlos III in Madrid, who is Deputy Vice President for Science Policy there. Eva was the chair of the Open Science Policy Platform, and I like it that she describes herself as an open knowledge militant. We have Professor Bernard Rentier, twice elected rector of the University of Liège in Belgium, a virologist, where in Liège he pioneered the green model of open access since 2007, when most of us even had not heard about open access, at least me. Bernard published a book also on open science last year, of course open. Then we have Jeroen Hertz, professor at the University Medical Center of the Free University of Amsterdam, who is a big promoter of open and transdisciplinary research, which he also does as president of ZonMW, the Dutch funder of health research, and also as a member of the board of directors of NWO, another major Dutch funder. And finally, we have Gareth O'Neill, an expert on open science, consultant for Technopolis, ambassador of Plan S, and former president of Eurodoc, the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. Very welcome to all of you to the session. Let me try in a few minutes to frame the topic a bit before I pass it to you to the panel. I want to make 2 points. My first point is that we have focused a lot in the past 10 years or more on the outputs of science, opening up the outputs of science. And this has been quite successful. But open science is about the research process itself. Some people go as far as saying that open science is about reinventing the scientific process. Not just opening up outputs like publications. Because if researchers share knowledge and data as early as possible in the process, in open collaboration, engaging with society, then we'll see spectacular improvements in the quality, in the efficiency, in the impact of research, as well as in the relation of trust between science on the one hand and society on the other. This is why open science is a policy priority for the European Commission, and as a funder, we are also walking the talk. In the next framework program, you will see, hopefully, that will require beneficiaries to make their publications immediately available in open access. Will require them to make their data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and open when it's possible, and will recognize and reward citizen engagement and end-user involvement in research. We also support key infrastructures that make science open, like the European Open Science Cloud, EOSC. However, developing the policies and implementing them as a funder will not be enough, and this is my second point. My second point is that fully realizing open science will be dependent on radical changes to the assessment system for research, for researchers and their institutions, in order to provide the incentives and the rewards that are needed, so that the system favors quality over quantity, favors open collaborative work over individualism, and does not punish working in between disciplines. But reforming the research assessment system will be no simple thing to do. I think you all know this very well. The old system is ingrained in our institutions, is ingrained in the scientific culture, and it will require cooperation with all stakeholders, from the RPOs, the research performing organizations, to the publishers, to the funders, to the policymakers at all levels, national, international, etc. So this is what the Open Science Policy Platform has addressed in the last years of its operation, this major bottleneck of the system of incentives and rewards. And during this session, we'll hear some of its outcomes and recommendations, in particular from the first two speakers, and then we'll have the discussion with the other speakers and the audience. I hope that by the end of this session, a vision of how science will be carried out in 2030 will be emerging. So please keep to your time. And Rebecca, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Kostas, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you all today and to provide you with a brief summary of the final report of the Open Science Policy Platform, which, as Kostas says, has been working actually for the last 4 years with 26 representatives of the key stakeholders across Europe behind sort of the scientific ecosystem. So if I can have the first slide, please. So there are two key things that we aim to do with the final report, which came out in May earlier this year. The first was really around trying to review progress against the OSPP REC recommendations, which we published 2 years ago in May 2018, and where we had gone through as a group, focusing on each of the 8 pillars of open science that the Commission had identified, and identifying 2 to 4 recommendations on each of those, but also identifying who we felt were the key stakeholders who could really push those forward. And so what we've done is highlight exemplars for those and also identify blockers, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the second half is really around trying to provide a vision in terms of how we actually move forward beyond open science and think more broadly about a shared research knowledge system by 2030. So if I can have next slide. So in terms of progress since that set of recommendations that we put out 2 years ago, I think there were 3 main outcomes, of which I'm going to focus particularly on 2 of them. The first big outcome was a registry of pilots and implementations of responsible metrics, which I will talk about in a minute. The second one, which I won't talk about so much, but was something that we had as a key recommendation, was to encourage open science coordinators or task forces at a national level across the different member states. And we were really pleased, I think, to see the development of CONOSC in October last year as part of the Finnish presidency, which is the Council for National Open Science Coordination, to really help drive that forward at the national level across the different states in Europe. And then a third one, which I will talk a bit about, is we collated a series of practical commitments for implementation across the different actors, and I'll summarise those elements. So the next slide, please. So the registry of pilots, we felt that actually there are a lot of frameworks out there. Actually, as part of the work that we were doing, Paul Wouters and team and an expert group pulled together a really great report looking at both frameworks and really building on the work that had been done as part of the Leiden Manifesto and the Metric Tide and other documents, to pull together a set of frameworks to help think about how to implement responsible metrics. And they also included in there a huge table, I think there's about 140 different metrics, and an analysis of those and how effective those different ones can be in different situations. So there's lots of frameworks out there. There's actually already a number of examples, little pockets here and there, both in Europe but also worldwide, of contextualised and responsible use of those metrics. But what's really missing, and what we felt is really the next step to enable broader uptake, is to encourage more and more pilots and implementations so that we can see how these different approaches work in different contexts. We can learn from them, and then others can also look to adopt some of those. And so this is why we are working with the RDA and also collaborating with DORA, so the San Francisco Declaration of Research Assessment, to create a structured searchable registry. And the crucial things here are A, that we want this to be global and not just focused in Europe, but B, it really has to be structured and searchable so that an organization can search very rapidly to find other similar organizations and groups in similar situations, understand what they've done, and then learn from the outputs of that. So the idea is that you register the pilot, you document what it is you're going to do and what change you're going to make, and then you come back in a year, 2 years, whatever makes sense for that particular pilot, and update the record in terms of what are the outcomes, both positive and negative, so that people can learn from it. And the idea is that you have open evaluation of those pilots and that we build on those successes. Next slide, please. So the other key part that came out of this report was looking at practical commitments of implementation. So we've got the recommendations, but actually, where are there examples or where people have actually started to implement them and move a step forward? And so what we asked each of those 26 stakeholder groups that I talked about that made up the OSPP to do is to look at where there were some actual practical implementations and give examples of those, give a general assessment as to where they think progress is made in each of these recommendations, and also identify blockers. And there were 3 key things that came out of this. One is there was a general consensus in many of those 8 areas of open science where most of the stakeholders felt that we'd made reasonable progress, actually, and we were probably in general at the implementation stage for many of those, although at least there were examples of implementation happening. What was particularly interesting, though, was that in research integrity, skills and education, and citizen science, there was a real disparity of views. So in general, it was those that felt that they were tasked with really making the change, typically felt that we were at adoption, maybe even common practice, whereas the rest of the community felt that actually we were still in discussion and planning. And so I think it's worth really delving into that. We need to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where there's real polarization and even blame potentially. It may be that we've got different views as to where we're trying to get to. It may be that actually a lot of work has been done, but it hasn't been communicated effectively. There's all sorts of reasons for it, but we need to understand why there are very different views as to where we are in some of those areas. The second thing that I think really came out of it is the need to have much more debate and discussion between academia and industry about open science challenges, because there's a lot of private-public partnerships, but there are real disparities in views, and actually industry often aren't involved in many of the discussions around open science, but they really need to be, and so we really need to focus on that going forward. And then the third thing is just making sure that we develop a framework that ensures that by opening up knowledge, which is obviously a really good thing to do, but we make sure that we don't inadvertently disadvantage players that are already underprivileged. There's a full list, obviously, of the practical commitments of implementation, the blockers by actor in the report in the annex, so I do encourage you to look at that. So next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So sorry, just go back one slide. So looking forward in terms of the vision beyond open science, there are several key aspects that that's really influenced that vision that we pulled together. The first is that I think open science is progressing slower than certainly I think many anticipated, and there are some key obstacles that remain. There's a real disparity in progress and motivation along many of the different axes. We look at disciplines or institutions or actors or researchers at different career stages. There's a real disparity there. There's also a lack of policy alignment, even locally, never mind regionally, nationally, and then internationally. And researchers and research groups are often getting caught in the middle of that. And then there's an insufficient cost-benefit analysis done, really, I think, in terms of open science requirements and what's involved there. The other big thing I think we wanted to get across is that open science isn't an end in itself. We've spent a lot of time focusing on open science specifically. But I think some people have almost started to lose sight of why we're doing this and actually what are we trying to achieve and what's that bigger picture. And so what we wanted to do here is put open science in the context of the broader picture of the shift in society generally, and how open science is a way to achieve that rather than it being the end itself. Also, obviously, this year we've had COVID, and what that's demonstrated, I think, is the power of actually opening up science, sharing knowledge, and collaboration, which has happened to a large degree throughout this COVID crisis, actually has really demonstrated significant acceleration of progress and new insights. And what's really important is that we learn from that. We leverage those benefits, but we learn and make structural changes more broadly so that it isn't just in public health emergencies that we get to see these benefits. It's essential that all science and all research benefits from that for the good of society. And so we call for European member states and other relevant actors to co-create, develop and maintain a research system based on shared knowledge. So in my next slide, I just highlight the 5 key elements.
Rebecca, you need to wrap up in a few seconds.
Will do. So the 5 key elements around ensuring that we have an academic career structure that really supports this and drives incentives to support a shift, that we have a research system that's reliable, transparent and trustworthy and has integrity, a system that enables innovation, that we develop a culture that facilitates diversity and equity of opportunity, and that we have a system that's built on evidence-based policy and practice. And my next slide, I just want to thank the OSPP members and the EC Research and Innovation team for their support, and encourage you to look at the report, which is hosted on the EC site. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let's pass directly to the second presentation, 5 minutes this time. Eva, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Kostas, also for the kind introduction and the frame in this discussion. And thank you very much, Rebecca, for presenting the report. I cannot do it better than you. And I will not talk about the report. I will talk about dates and targets and deadlines. When I got this invitation for this workshop, for this particular panel here, I remember a workshop that I participated in 2015, where we were exactly discussing Open Science 2030. So I always said that sometimes we are reinventing the wheel and we are talking about the same. And what we have been doing in these 4 years in the OSPP, that was an amazing work, was inventing the future. And Alan Kay used to say that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. But now we don't need to invent the future because the future comes to us. We have the target, we have the deadline on Horizon 2020. And now we have the same challenges in front of us, but we move the year. So we have more time, and we think that we have more expectations to address all the challenges that open science ask us to act. And also I want to pick something that Kostas was saying in the frame introduction, that we are focusing on the research outcomes and the research outputs, because they are the things that the researchers are based on. Our career is based on the outputs. Actually, when Plan S started, I say, okay, open science became again open access and papers because we all think about papers. But in this document that I'm not sure if I can paste in the chat and everybody can see it, it's a document that we did in 2015. It was just a creative document that somebody wrote up of our discussion, and it was entitled "A Day in the Life of a Scientist in 2030." And it starts, the year is 2030. Open science has become a reality and is offering a whole range of new unlimited opportunities for research and discovery worldwide. Scientists, citizens, publishers, research institutions, public and private research funders, students and education professionals, as well as companies and citizens from around the globe are sharing an open virtual research environment called the lab. In that moment, we call this infrastructure the lab. Nowadays, it will be called EOSC, for example. But we mention in this document the day in a life, the day what happened in a scientist in 2030. And it happened to be that Chiara, which is the protagonist of this story, is a young Italian expert in marine biology, but she gets up at 5 a.m. And I say, well, in 2030, the researchers, we still sleep very, very few hours, which is a damage. But let me focus what happened in the day of a researcher in 2030. She interconnects through the lab, through the EOSC, through the whatever infrastructure it is. All the process have changed. She's not focused in the evaluation, and she's not focused in somebody asking her for the paper. In the whole day of a researcher, there is no 1 minute that a researcher in 2030 is thinking on an output, is thinking on the process, is thinking on the creative way of making science, which is what we dream about in 10 years' time now. But the point is that the reality is not that. I would love to see that in 2030, the day of a researcher's life is like this, thinking about connections, thinking about multidisciplinarity, thinking about platforms, Internet of Things, everything. But the point is that I'm thinking that if we don't change the way we measure science, the life in the researcher's life, the day in the researcher's life, it will be from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. or even later, thinking about, I have to make another paper, and my paper has to be in a journal, Impact Factor journal, because if I don't publish there, I will not have a career. So the problem is that I would like to dream on this story of having a lab, of having a collaborative environment, and centering the process in a creative way of making science a reality. But I think if we don't do it, and there is only 10 years, we are moving the date, but we don't have so much time. If we don't change the way we measure science and we evaluate our researchers, the point is that we are going to have the same thinking from 5 a.m. until 5 p.m. Thank you very much. That's what I want to share with you. And I hope you can check the document because it's very inspiring.
Thank you, Eva. That's a motivating vision. Stop focusing on just getting the right papers out, but focus on the impact and the quality of the research. So next, Bernard Rentier, it's your turn, please.
Thank you very much. I've been focusing mostly on evaluation, indeed, as Eva just mentioned. I'm chairing the European University Association subgroup on research assessment in an open access context. And from several surveys, we know that open science has a definite appeal to researchers, especially the younger ones. However, we are convinced that no open science will ever be achieved without full compliance by researchers. And as Eva mentioned, no compliance can be obtained if evaluation is not consistent with the open science principle. So if I can have the first slide, or even the second one. I don't know if they're coming up. Anyway, there are three main bodies that must be involved in the change of evaluation, changing the culture. First, universities, and then we'll see also university associations and research funders, and then evaluation committees and evaluators. So now, a few points about what universities should be doing. They should be suggested very strongly to universities to gather together with in national consortia and focused on evaluation, so that the national procedures, at least, are being harmonized. They should also create in-house an institutional committee on evaluation policy, so that for a whole university, the evaluation policy is the same. They should determine institution-specific assessment criteria, and we insist on narratives, because it's not only numbers, it should be stories, it should be explaining how a researcher is really contributing to science. Then they must, of course, set up training programs, especially for the younger generation. They should ensure that in doctoral training programs, the criteria are very well precised, so that researchers know what the OS principles are. Next slide. Today, unfortunately, it's been requested from researchers to have 2 or 3 papers before they defend their thesis, which put them on terrible pressure, which is not always very good, and it's promoting overpublication. Now, universities, associations like the EUA or research funders should promote international coordination and harmonization. Very important to try to unify as widely as possible the system. Then foster an international debate on recognition and awards, and provide training and instruction to the universities' assessment committees. The committees, of course, should be trained themselves. And the last slide is about the evaluation committees and the evaluators in these committees, at wherever level they are, universities or larger, they should, as mentioned already in previous speakers, make responsible use of metrics. And I remind you that of the OSCAM, which is the Open Science Career Assessment that has been proposed by a group within OSPP, by the way, and which is available widely, which make use of multiple criteria being involved in the assessment itself, rather than numbers. Favor qualitative over quantitative criteria, and then require from evaluees themselves to have a selection of what they consider their best papers, their most influential papers, and the papers that they contributed the most to the progress of knowledge. I think this covers the 3 aspects.
Bernard, thank you very much. The key players are the institutions, the universities, or the organization. This is what you're saying. And adopting open science practices implies major decisions that need to be taken at the university management level by the rector, by the president, by the chancellor, whatever it is. So this is a very important point. So next we turn to Jérôme. 5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to reflect on the OSPP final report. Congratulations to the members of the OSPP. I think they have delivered a series of great reports on the many aspects of open science. And this final report brings it all together and inspires a view on shared knowledge systems in the year 2030. So there are 2 reasons, I guess, or 2 aspects that I would like to highlight. One is that for open science to succeed as a program, there is a need for collaboration of all stakeholders in the research system. And this is something that the OSPP report really makes clear. So libraries, institutions, funders, publishers, all stakeholders have their own jurisdiction, so to say. No one can achieve open science on its own. So everybody has to do something, and we have to work together to make it work. I think in addressing this and addressing ways how to do this, the open science agenda has also become very practical and actionable. Another aspect that I would like to highlight is what has already been highlighted before, the reward and incentives system at universities and research institutes. So we cannot come to an open science agenda that is successful if we're not changing the culture in which we assess our researchers. And Bernard Randier discussed the role that universities would have to play. And I agree that the universities are very important, but I also think that there is a role for funders like myself. We can sometimes so to say, change and movement where universities have more difficulties in starting the move. So, for example, the universities are tied to universal quest for rankings, and I think that in these rankings they are. It's difficult for them to get out of that. So in the Netherlands, for example, we've supported a steering group that involves the universities, the funders, the university medical centers, and the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, who together came up with a position paper that says that a number of things has to change in academia. For example, open science practice. And in following these the guidelines that this group of stakeholders made together, the funder has already started to change quite a lot. So, for example, at ZonMW and NWO, so the medical and the general science funders in the Netherlands, we signed the DORA Declaration in 2019. Implementing principles in our funding schemes, and we took the usual measures to delete all references to questionable metrics like the impact factor and the H index in our grants. We put in place a ban on all those metrics by applicants. We adopted a broad definition of research output to make it clear that we reward research for a variety of research products. So not only the highly cited papers, but also patents, data sets, code, software, etc. And based on the premise that there's no ideal type of researcher, we need a diversity of talents. And we need that diversity of talents to tackle current societal and scientific challenges. So applicants are asked to identify, for example, their open outputs. And this already has led to more recognition of open research practices in our country. A lot of the work that went into the joint statement of the need for a different research assessment system, including open science practices, was inspired by the work that the OSPP did. So thanks again for that, and I'm looking forward to see how all this work will find its way into the next framework program.
Thank you very much. That's a very interesting experience you have had in the Netherlands. And we will be studying it very closely to see how it evolves. Gareth, last but not least.
Kostas, thank you. And hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very okay.
Perfect. Then maybe what I would like to say is just to state where we currently are at the moment. And that is we are in a closed system of science. And a couple of simple facts. Basically, we have a scientific publishing system that is dominated by 6 major commercial and non-commercial publishers. We know that 90 to 95% of most data that researchers or even outside of academia produce is what we can call dark data. So data that we have no real concept of, we cannot access it, we cannot use it. It's essentially reuseless. And we see that there is a perverse hyperfocus on publishing articles in prestige journals for researchers. So, and maybe just to also add that there's a general lack of engagement with the public from the researcher side to validate or valorize even their research and to have some real impact on society. So I do agree completely with many of the recommendations of the OSPP, and also what you said earlier, Kostas, that we need a radical change to the system, and especially to the rewards and incentives that go behind that. And I would put forward that we need to be opening up the entire research life cycle. So not just focusing on publications and not just strictly on open access to publications, but we should be opening up all of these activities in the researcher's life cycle. So we could think of opening up research applications, whether they've been honored or not. We could think of opening up our research methodologies. We could think of opening up our actual data collections at various stages of the research data lifecycle. For instance, we should be making, in my view, minimally our data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, and then we can look forward to see how much we can actually open up these data sets and to what extent. And we should be opening up not just publications, but the actual preprint versions of publications. We could look into ways of opening up the peer reviews on those publications. We could be looking at opening up how those peer reviews have been incorporated into articles, and ultimately even a form of post-evaluation of finalized manuscripts. So my personal view is that we should be opening up this full research life cycle, and crucially to do that, then we need to fundamentally change the reward structure that's in place in academia. So as we know, most researchers, if not all researchers, are rewarded scientifically in their research evaluations and in their career evaluations for articles that they produce in high impact journals. And this is where we should be moving away from this and start rewarding for other things. I agree with what Bernard said earlier, that many PhDs have to publish 2 or 3 or even 5 articles to defend a PhD. I agree with the chair of the European Open Science Cloud, Karel Lauben, who has said that, and I don't know if he will, if I quote him fully on this, but that he thinks that we should be scaling this down to, for instance, focusing on one publication, where we put maximum effort into that publication to get a good publication out there that's scientifically sound, and that parallel to that publication, we, for instance, make a data set fair related to that research, and that we open up that research. And that in itself could be a way of looking at the PhD. We've both published an article of good merit, and that we have published a data set together. I think to do this, we need to follow some of the recommendations in the OSPP. One of them was on the Open Science Career Assessment Matrix, which came out of one of the working groups. And I believe that this offers a whole scala of activities that we could be rewarding researchers for. So again, not just focusing on the publications, but focusing on many of the activities that researchers are doing already, but unfortunately are perhaps not being rewarded for this. I think I'll leave it there. Maybe what I would like to say also is that we look forward to the future European Open Science Cloud to see how this will enable open science. And I do believe that the key to the future is the data, that we should be making this data fair, and that we should be looking into ways of how we will open up that data. And just to be clear, when I say open, I do not mean everything should be open or that everything should immediately be open. That's a discussion we will have to have in academia, and also, as Rebecca noted, with industry when we're dealing with public-private partnerships. And I stop there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. Let's see some questions from the audience. We'll have time for a couple of them. Okay, how do European open access deals with regions more protective on their data? In other words, are data shared regardless of the geopolitical situation? That's a tough question. Who wants to take it? Gareth, you were the last one and put the emphasis on data. So do you want to have a go?
I'm not sure if what's being referred to there, Kostas, is what we could call geo-blocking. So I'll take it from 2 angles. From my personal view, I believe that we should be opening up research data. Absolutely, if it is relating to a scientific article, I see no reason why a data set should not be open if it's related to an article, unless there are sensitive reasons in which case then we can look into them. Should all aspects of the research data lifecycle be open? I don't know. I don't know if we would even have the storage capacity for that for large projects. I do believe that finalized, cleaned data sets should be made in absolute certainty fair, and then we could look into how open they should be or at what stage they should be open. Many researchers are afraid, for instance, of opening up their data sets because they do not want to be scooped, meaning that they don't want others to publish on their own data set before they've had a chance. And I understand that, and I think that's something that we have to take into account and perhaps allow us an embargo of 1 year to 3 years. I'm not quite sure how long for data sets. Now, when it comes to geo-blocking, I am personally, for now in any case, against this. The European Commission proposed many years ago the 3 O's: open science, open innovation, open to the world. And the idea behind open to the world was that Europe takes a moral stand forward, opens up our research, opens up our data to the rest of the world so that they can profit from it and collaborate with us and engage with us, and we can all move forward together. This concept of geo-blocking, where access is restricted, in my view, goes against the whole concept of open. And it does not, in my view, put forward a moral reason to do this. I do understand that if a member state or if Europe is investing heavily, for instance, in data in European Open Science Cloud, that we would want to profit from that. But I do believe we should be taking a moral stand forward in opening up our own work.
Okay, we have 3 minutes or 3.5 minutes and time for just one more question. There's one that has gotten a lot of thumbs up, which is research assessment is closely connected with funding mechanisms, promotion and scientific degree and title awarding processes, in other words, with HR policies. How can we change it? Bernard referred to this, and Jérôme, from the funder's point of view, referred to this. Can you have a 1 minute each go at it? What would you say in a very brief answer to this? So, Jérôme, first about the funding mechanisms.
Sorry. Yes, basically, it's a major point, and this is why we're insisting, so that all stakeholders are actually playing the game and contributing, and at all levels of assessment, this should be supported. Otherwise, the whole system doesn't work. But so the funding, the promotion, and the awarding system must be completely harmonized in that direction. This is extremely difficult to achieve.
Thanks. Jérôme, what should funders do?
Yeah. So the funder, in our case, asks for a narrative. So the researcher is asked to tell us why he or she thinks he should be awarded the grant. And I think that is very important. So we leave some of that overstretched metric work where a researcher has to jump through a lot of hoops, and then we ask the researcher, him or herself, what they think is very important in their work to be evaluated. I think that is something that we could implement much further in Europe. To work from narratives and to refuse to judge people by their H factor, by their metrics in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Another question says, to what extent do you think the new tools for learning and teaching, such as MOOCs, can support innovation, foster open education? Eva, you want to have just a 30-second pitch at it?
Well, I'm very happy to take this one. I'm very happy to take this one because I'm a defender of open education, open knowledge, and open education is behind open knowledge. And I think it's a very good mechanism to put a massive amount of people that they are citizens willing to learn something in a context that they can become even citizen scientists. So I do really believe on the MOOCs, even if we are in the post-MOOC area in education and open education terms. But I think it's a good input of open science and open knowledge as such as we conceive it in the OSPP.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Eva. Thank you very much, everybody. We have to leave it at that. That was very interesting interventions. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. See you again.